Welcome everybody to the next episode of the Cannabis Review. I'm delighted to be joined in this episode by Shane MacGuill, who's a Senior Industry Manager at Euromonitor International. How are you keeping today, Shane?
Hi, Owen. How are things?
Fantastic, mate. Thank you very much for taking your time to do this. For those who don't know about Euromonitor International, they're one of the top research companies in the world. Can you maybe give everybody a quick little overview of how you came to work with them and how you dipped your toe into the cannabis industry?
Yeah, so Euromonitor is what we call a strategic research agency. So that means we produce kind of data on an annual basis across a range of industries. We're not like a tactical agency, so we don't have scan data like a Nielsen would. We're not doing kind of big consumer tracker panels, etc. But we produce kind of annual data sets on about 30 different industries. I was started working for Euromonitor about a decade ago, kind of fell into it by accident. I was doing some legal training by background and kind of took a break from that and ended up starting to work temporarily, or what I thought was temporarily. Then I started working within the tobacco space, and until about 2016, I was doing that exclusively, looking at the tobacco industry, servicing kind of the clients we have on the tobacco side, which are a mix of kind of industry clients, so the big tobacco companies, but also some of the public health agencies, governments, etc. And then in around 2016-17, I started looking at the cannabis industry initially from the perspective of what impact legalization in that space was going to have on the tobacco space. But I very kind of quickly realized that, the cannabis industry was something that was going to be extremely meaningful across a range of the industries that we look at within Euromonitor. And a lot of the kind of structural problems, if you want to put it that way, that we were seeing in industries like tobacco, but not limited to tobacco. If you look at things like alcoholic drinks, consumer health, all of those kind of those big sort of monolithic legacy industries, consumers were disillusioned with what those industries were producing, what those companies were delivering. If you look at to a certain extent tobacco, but you can see it very clearly, I think, in the alcoholic drinks industry. Some of those big alcoholic drinks producers are really kind of an exercise in financial engineering as much as kind of delivering to what consumers really, really want and need. And we kind of very quickly came to the conclusion that the legal cannabis industry as it then was had a lot of potential to kind of address a lot of these kind of issues that consumers had with existing kind of product offerings across a range of spaces. So we kind of, myself and in particular my equivalent on the AD side, Spiros Malandrakis, kind of started to developing the research we were doing on the cannabis space almost in our spare time, really. And started to kind of expand and widen that. We began to work with clients in that space. It took a lot of persuading internally in the company that this was something that was kind of serious, that had commercial potential for us, etc. And we've now brought it forward kind of from that sort of start in about 2016 to here, where we now have a kind of fully fledged cannabis database that sits alongside all of the other data sets that we have within the company. I always tell people, one of the things that obviously the industry talks about a lot and that we talk about in the industry is the idea of normalizing cannabis. But I mean, within Euromonitor, cannabis is now, I'm quite proud and pleased to say, fully normalized. It sits alongside all of those other industries that we research. And we try to look at the cannabis space as an industry in its own right, but also through the lens of those other industries as well.
Very good. For somebody as big as you guys, I'm sure like cannabis, after a little bit of niggling with the bosses, I know you guys were set up in the 70s, which is a good while ago, that cannabis across consumer packaged goods, touches across pharmaceuticals, cosmetics. There's a number of different disciplines. So how quickly did you guys get into the run of things of being able to create reports? Was it a year or two of due diligence, or was it information that you already had stacked up in time for the first report? What was kind of the process of getting the sector at Euromonitor off the ground?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing for us that we really wanted to do was kind of understand the industry very well. I mean, as I said, I did a lot of the work with Spiros. Spiros is someone who uses cannabis. Me not so much, but we were coming at it from different angles, and we really wanted to understand, the industry in terms of the regulation around the space. What companies that are currently operating, or at that time were currently operating in the industry, what what they're set up like, what they do, how they produce, what the supply chain is, all of that sort of stuff. So we spent some time, as you say, I guess, due diligence, but just basically doing our research. I mean, we're a research agency, so that's what we were. We started off doing was just making sure that we fully understood the industry, speaking to people that we reached out to anyone and everyone that we could find working in the space who would speak to us, to get a sense of what the industry looked like. We went to some of those early conferences that were up and around in London and so on, to get a handle on it. And then after about 6 months or a year or so, we started really writing some of the briefing work that we were doing and working more closely with clients. And I think, as you said, what sets us apart, I guess, is that we have cannabis sitting alongside all of those other industries. There are a lot of very good research agencies and data providers in that space, particularly in North America, obviously, who are providing very, very granular data on the cannabis industry. That's not something we do, but what we can do is put cannabis in the context of all of the other kind of consumer verticals that there are. And consumers are neither one thing nor another exclusively. A cannabis consumer is not just consuming cannabis, they're obviously consuming in other areas as well. There's obviously the potential, I think most importantly or most crucially, we feel, for cannabinoid products to compete with products that are existing in other areas and kind of win over consumers who are already consuming in those spaces. So we started looking at those adjacent industries, particularly things like obviously tobacco, alcohol, but consumer health as well, packaged food, those kind of spaces, the soft drinks industry, and bringing all of that into the equation as well.
Yeah, I've been looking at this industry for a couple of years now and kind of started this off as a data gathering exercise to see who was full of shit, who wasn't, who were the operators, who wasn't. And it seems to me that we're splitting into the industry. North America's got their own industry, but the way it looks to me is that Europe is going to turn into biotech companies, and synthetic cannabinoids are going to dominate cosmetics, food and beverage, vapes, tinctures, a number of other different projects, purely because the molecule is safe, it's replicable 1,000,000 times over, it has to pass the stringent of rules. And it looks now, even with Germany's announcement there last week, that I always believed that the social club model was where the rec industry was going. We were never going to have these dispensary stores all over Europe. That it seems to be that the European industry is now splitting into pharma and biotech dominating the ingredient side of things, and then the social clubs giving to the, let's say, the activists and the consumers what it is that they actually want, which is right to grow, being able to buy product at a specific price and not being price scheduled. Do you think the industry in Europe is going the way I think it is?
I mean, I think certainly on the more, if you want to put a therapeutic side or that kind of CBD and medicinal side, I think that's definitely correct. There's a lot of kind of precedent for regulation at the EU level. If you look at kind of devices regulation or medicines regulation, for the way that might move, certainly the initial kind of regulation of CBD around novel foods and making sure that there's an evidence base there and that there's licensing and so on. I think we'll see more of that. And in general, again, Europe is, to just broaden it out, in general, Europe tends to be more restrictive, I think, in terms of the way they regulate substance consumption than somewhere like in North America. So I think that's certainly true. It does seem like in the short term, in the rec side, that the social club model is the way it's moving. And obviously, again, there's precedent for that in terms of what's happening in Spain. There are social clubs in some of the other European markets already. I do, somewhat wonder ultimately whether that's going to, kind of expand the industry in the way that perhaps the industry itself would want, perhaps even the way governments would want, in terms of being able to deliver an excise revenue base and all of that sort of stuff, and really develop an industry that employs significant numbers of people and so on. So I'm still slightly hesitant in terms of not in terms of the social club model itself. I think, as you say, that's obviously something that will deliver to consumers what they want, the flower at the right price and so on, and strip away a lot of what I guess you could describe as the nonsense that goes on in North America. But I do think there's a cost of the social club model in terms of where do you really get that investment that maybe is needed in the industry to develop things like format, innovation, technology, to develop kind of brands, etc., that are going to bring consumers who aren't already engaged in the legacy industries into the space. So it may be, as looks like is going to happen in Germany, it may be that the first wave of legalization on the rec side in Europe will be oriented around the social club, but I do think ultimately it may well go further than that, just because there's a shortcoming there in terms of industry development, I think.
Do you think the retail model in Europe will be dominated by the North American brands like cookies? I've already seen some transactions where people have acquired the rights to cookie stores in Europe already.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to be the case? Just with they've got a decade of experience, they'll have the retail know-how, or do you see that there is going to be capital in the European markets and there is going to be brands and, let's say, retail stores as big in Europe as they are in North America, and we end up exporting over to North America with some of the brands we create?
I do think that there will be North American brands that have the potential to penetrate in Europe. Whether it's going to be cookies specifically, I don't know. I think obviously there's some kind of first mover advantage there in terms of brand equity and name recognition and all that sort of thing. And I know that, for example, in the medical cannabis market in Germany, there's patients that are looking at cookies, and there's already a certain equity there. But I think if you look at, again, for example, an adjacent market like the alcohol market or the tobacco market, there's a number of local brands within the European space that there has been, over a number of years. And particularly if you think about that sort of smaller scale social club model, I think that implies really more local, more indigenous brands, and at least initially within the space. And I think, again, look at Berlin, which is likely to be, whether there's full legalization in Germany or whether it goes to some kind of regional pilot or a combination of that and social club. You can really imagine the kind of, I guess, unique culture of Berlin, developing some strong and interesting local cannabis brands out of that. And again, look at something like Fritz Cola or whatever, one of the only colas in Europe that has strong equity, that competes with a big global North American brand coming out of Germany. I think there will be those types of brands in the cannabis space in Europe. So I don't think it's going to be all North American brands. And I think, if I was someone who was looking at licensing over a North American brand right now to enter into a European environment that we don't know what that's actually going to look like, I think I would be probably thinking twice about that, to be quite honest.
Another one of the questions I want to ask you, you're based in the UK and have a lot of experience over there. One of the things I start to see a lot of is the media entities, and let's say some of the companies in the UK, they still seem that they're part of Europe, and that the trading between the UK and Europe in the cannabis industry is going to be fine. I own another company that trades with the UK, and it's the biggest shit show I've ever dealt with since Brexit came in, the tax getting added. Do you see the UK cannabis companies being at a disadvantage to the main European entities in France and Germany and Spain and countries like that?
Yeah, I think that potentially will become more of an issue over time. I mean, obviously there isn't, there isn't a huge industry right now. Obviously there's a certain infrastructure around the legacy space, but there isn't a huge industry right now. So maybe it's not as apparent as it will become, but I think that's certainly the case. I mean, obviously traditionally, or over the last number of years, I think the UK industry has grown up as much around, while there is sort of strong consumption of CBD and so on in the UK market, I think the industry there has grown up around the fact that there's some of the capital is based in London, and some of that is happening in that space, and industries have grown up around that. So I think they haven't really tested that trade flow between the UK and Europe. And I think you're right. You'll find that over time, as that infrastructure develops, that, if you want to call it isolation, will become kind of more pronounced in the cannabis space. And again, there are strong European companies increasing in the space. Obviously, we know some of the market companies that are in Germany, the likes of Sanity and so on. There's a strong, for example, again in Spain, and I just came back from ICBC in Spain, as you can see, like a strong kind of industry beginning to develop in Spain. There are seed companies there, for example, that are amongst the biggest employers in the locations in which they're based and so on. So I don't think the European industry is going to be waiting for UK companies to come across and deliver to them. I think there'll be plenty of European mainland-based companies that will be able to do that for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about Ireland before we go. We had a Cannabis Summit in the RDS there like 6 weeks ago, sold out, great event, and it was pitched as Dublin is going to be the base for Europe for any North American company, that if you're doing cultivating in Portugal or extraction in Romania, whatever it may be, that Dublin should be the main base of Europe. Do you see Ireland being one of the biggest winners of, let's say, a European cannabis industry? Because the North American companies are coming here. They all seem to be geared up for it. And why would they move into a non-English speaking territory that has a couple of disadvantages? Why wouldn't they follow the remit that Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook and the CEO of Pfizer have all done and set up base here? Do you see us being one of the big winners of this?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly an argument for that, and obviously there's underlying fundamentals there that you've just kind of adverted to in terms of what makes Ireland attractive for any kind of company. It's that time zone, language, it's the tax as well. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that. It's the levels of education, the sort of labor force that's there, etc. So I don't think the cannabis industry is any different to that, and particularly when you talk about the European market likely to be one that is focused around biotech and all of that kind of aspect of it. I think that there's certainly a strong argument for that. Obviously, I think obviously the drug policy or the cannabis policy that's in place there probably feeds into it as well. I'm interested to see now what's going to happen with the kind of citizens' assembly. I think there seems to me to be again coming out of a historical background where obviously you wouldn't have put Ireland as a big candidate for liberalisation in terms of cannabis policy. I think there's something interesting brewing there. If you look at public perception around what we should be doing in the space, I think there could be movement as well from a policy point of view that actually just enhances that overall kind of business proposition as well. So I certainly think that's an element here, and that Ireland probably could be an oversized player in the European industry as well. I mean, it already is to some extent. You don't have to look far for an Irish face in the European cannabis industry. So there's plenty of Irish presence as it is, and I think some of that's going to reflect or going to come back in terms of actual physical presence of companies in Ireland.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We've reached over our time. I could actually talk to you for another hour on this topic, Shane. It's been very informative. Hopefully we can get to have a part 2 to this conversation in a couple of months' time, and hopefully the Citizens Assembly over here have taken a couple of steps forward.
Yeah, we can speak after that. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, Sean.
Thank you very much, Shane. Until next episode, everybody.